Welcome to this week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham, professor at Baylor in Waco, Texas. In case you were wondering, it is pronounced Waco, not Wacko, but that has not stopped anybody from saying Wacko. So feel free to sort into either based on your preferences and if you're ever passing through town. This podcast is about the personal stories of living economists and occasionally dead ones when I can get ChatGPT to pretend to be one, as I did the other day with an interview with the founder of economics, Adam Smith, played by ChatGPT-4 on a romp through his classic book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And on that note, today I am introducing to you Avi Goldfarb, professor of marketing and a PhD economist by training at the University of Toronto. Avi has been at the forefront of artificial intelligence and what I would just probably call the economics of the internet for 20 years, dating back to his graduation from Northwestern University in the early 21st century. He, along with a select few other economists, too, were perfectly positioned to make strong contributions to our understanding of the economics of artificial intelligence. And given its popularity right now and its growing ubiquity, I thought it would be great to take a break from causal inference and Becker's students to the two of the series that I keep getting into, and sort of lean back into a series I haven't visited in a while, which is this economists in the tech industry. Avi, like I said, is not in industry. He's an economist in the marketing department at Toronto, but his career has studied the internet, the economics of the internet, particularly the industrial organization of the internet. And he's a great person to interview. Plus, I'm interested in artificial intelligence. So that makes him even more interesting to me. And I think he's going to be interesting to you. Plus, he is also a PhD economist in a marketing department at Toronto, which I think probably at least some listeners didn't know that marketing did hire PhD economists, but they do. In fact, a previous guest, Chris Nosko, formerly at Uber, now fairly senior economist at Amazon, began his career at Chicago's Booth School of Business in their marketing department. So I think it is probably, something that the young listeners probably should just kind of make a note of to learn more about opportunities, not just outside of academia, but even within academia, outside of economics, as they consider their own investments in human capital and ways that they might want to sort into job markets after they graduate. So we talk about Avi's career from early on at Northwestern, like I said, as a grad student, and how he managed to grab hold of a key piece of data from a firm, an internet firm, for lack of a better word, that went belly up during the dot-com era, but he left him with a big chunk of data that ended up sort of guiding him through a series of papers that ultimately helped him get tenure, which is kind of a key thing that sometimes you have to do. We talk about how he sort of got a reputation also early on for kind of bridging causal inference with the economics of the internet. He gained a reputation specifically for the kind of taking these natural experiment methodologies into that area. And I think it kind of helps show a little bit about how economics was exporting these ideas into other fields as part of its larger, imperialism, for lack of a better word, of a lot of fields. So, although some people hate that word for pretty obvious reasons. So, this is a fun interview for me. I hope it is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and enthusiastically promote this interview with at least 25 people that you meet in the next 48 hours. Let's make that the goal. Just kidding. All right, y'all have a great day, and I'll see you. I'll see you in just a second. Okay, well, it is my pleasure to have with me a guest that I've followed for a while now, but hadn't had a chance to actually meet in person. Guest, can you tell me your name, your job title, and who pays your paycheck?
Sure. I'm Avi Goldfarb. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, and I guess my title is the Rotman Chair in Artificial Intelligence and Healthcare.
Awesome. How long has there been a chair that says AI on it?
5 or 6 years.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Huh. Yeah. I guess, yeah, I'll save that for the end, but it seems like Toronto has had this connection with this AI for a little bit, right?
Uh, yeah, we a bunch of the technologies were developed in our comp sci department, and
Really?
so deep learning came out of Toronto Computer Science, Jeff
No
Hinton,
way. I didn't
and
know that. Huh.
um, so that's really why good part of the reason why we ended up seeing AI early because we saw it out of our comp sci department here.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that now is okay. I should have saved that astonishment
Okay.
for 45 minutes from now.
We're
All right.
foreshadowing.
We'll go,
Foreshadowing.
we'll return back to that. All right, cool. All right. So obviously nice to have you on the podcast. Well, so before we get started, can you sort of as an icebreaker, would you mind telling me a little bit what was a vacation that you had as a kid that still to this day you think about from time to time?
Um, that's funny. Okay, um, so I had kids, and when I was entering third grade, my oldest sister was about to go into college.
Hmm.
And parents thought it would be the last time we all got to take a trip together. That turned out not to be true, but that was what they thought.
Yeah.
And so they decided to do a big long trip to Europe, where
Uh-huh.
I, as a 7 or 8 year old, was way too young for. But my older sisters in high school were age appropriate.
Yeah.
And so we did a long trip the summer of 1983.
Uh-huh.
To Europe, where we went to Austria, to Switzerland, to France, to Scandinavia, and to England. And I remember the details of that trip, like almost day by day.
Uh-huh.
And looking at my own, third grade son right now, I can't believe that, how much of an impact on me.
Oh,
In terms of
really?
both the the classic tourism stuff that you'd imagine happens in Europe, but because me and my older brother were younger than my sisters, we did things like we went to the beach and we went to Legoland and all these things that you don't usually associate with Europe, but somehow do.
Oh, that's cool. So you still think about it from time. Do you and your siblings still talk about it?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's cool. Have you ever tried to? That's probably too random to try to recreate, but I guess has that kind of made you think about it when you go on vacations with your family?
Absolutely. Just the idea that those that vacation in particular are generally like real adventure vacations.
Yeah.
Kinds of things that you remember for a long time. And so when when my wife and I take our kids, we think the same kind of thing. Like, we real memories that will last a long time.
Right. You at least kind of know that's like a thing that you could at least like, that's a kind of vacation that you could even possibly have. And it makes you probably want to do that kind of vacation with your family, just knowing it's possible for them to have it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up here in Toronto.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Well, I'm in my hometown. I live 2 miles from my parents.
No way.
A block from one of my sisters. And so I'm one of the lucky people in our profession who actually got to live in their hometown and wants to.
Right.
And so, I grew up in Toronto, went away to grad school and came home.
Oh, so did you go to the University of Toronto as an undergrad?
I went to Queen's University, which is in Kingston, Ontario, which is 2.5 hours away. So.
Oh, okay. What did your parents do for a living?
My researcher.
Your dad, you said, say that again?
Marketing research.
What'd you say?
My dad did marketing research.
Oh, marketing research. Got it.
Yeah. Like, polling, focus groups, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And my mom, when I was actually basically after that trip, started an interior design business.
Oh.
So before that, she had 5 kids and that was enough. Mm-hmm. And then when my oldest sister went off to university, she started her own business.
Oh, started. So she always had that kind of that natural kind of aesthetic sort of personality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just this kind of, so you probably grew up in is it true? You probably grew up in just a beautiful home, kind of a beautiful aesthetic kind of life.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. She thought very carefully about what our rooms looked like and what the house looked like and all that. Absolutely.
Totally. 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 Did you inherit any of that? Are you sort of like that too?
No,
No.
not at all.
You know,
Uh,
I wish I had any of that.
None of it.
Uh, okay, cool. So where are you in the birth order? You've got your
I'm the
older.
youngest.
Oh, you're the youngest.
I'm the
Oh,
youngest.
okay.
So,
Okay. Okay. Did anybody else become an academic?
um, so my sister got her PhD. One of my sisters got her PhD in political science,
Hmm.
but then ended up in industry. And my brother is a writer, but he teaches at Tisch at NYU. So,
Oh, huh.
so he's
Well, like he teaches creative writing or something in the English department, something like
yeah,
that.
playwriting and screenwriting.
Oh, I bet y'all have very interesting conversations about all this AI. I bet that can
Absolutely,
be. I bet there's
yeah.
lots
Especially
of
when he was on strike.
strong. He was on
Yeah.
strike. Oh, okay, okay. So what kind of games and things did you like doing as a little kid? Being the youngest in the family and all that stuff.
I'm already into that. I like Lego,
Yeah.
uh, and lots of make believe games.
Oh
So
yeah.
that was more, me and my brother. He ended up going into the theater, right, and then
Right.
the entertainment industry. So we
Hmm.
played a lot of make believe games.
So even though you kind of weren't into interior design, you were a creative.
I was happy to follow my brother's creativity. I think is the
Uh,
better way to think about it.
so y'all had a lot of creative games,
Yeah, a lot of creative
like
games.
Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff, or something like that, like playing story games and stuff.
Yeah, story games, a little Dungeons and Dragons, but more actually acting out either with toys or ourselves what we were
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Did you have toys that you played with, like Transformers and GI Joes and stuff?
I had Transformers, I had Smurfs, and I had
Smurf.
Lego. Those were
Yeah. Oh, Legos. You said that. Yeah. Right.
those were my main three.
Well, so when you were little, like when you were 10, and somebody had said, Avi, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you remember thinking that you probably said or would have said?
I think I would have said scientist.
Oh yeah?
Uh, yeah,
What kind of
I
scientist?
I don't think I had an idea that there were kinds of scientists.
Yeah, as soon as I asked that, that's exactly what I thought too. I was like, it's just capital S.
Yeah, I was going to be a scientist. I was going to wear a white, lab coat and do stuff with glasses on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you loved, sorry, I interrupted you. So you would have
Yeah.
you would have said I wanted to be a scientist.
I would have said I want to be a scientist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
So go ahead.
and then I took high school sciences and realized I didn't want to be a scientist.
Yeah.
Um, once the science actually got real, I loved math. And I
Uh-huh.
loved history and political science and social sciences, but the hard sciences, I found, I don't know, I just found them kind of dull.
Mm-hmm.
I don't anymore now that I see my kids studying, and I somehow missed something in high school, but it was the math social science combination or math history combination that really excited me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you were always good at math, but you had this broad interest in like the social parts of people, history and everything like that.
Yeah, the social parts of people, but in a broad scale, not a narrow scale. The sort of how do people make decisions? That was an idea that became of interest much later.
Yeah.
It was more trying to understand the sweep of history and the differences between countries and how people live in different parts of the world. So history, geography, political science, that kind of thing.
Was that in the family? Because y'all go to Europe. So that trip, is that kind of
So
something in the family?
that um, yes, in the sense that my dad did marketing, and marketing is about understanding, how people act and how the world works in some sense, trying to identify what people might want.
Mm-hmm.
And he studied anthropology way back in, a long time ago. And then my three older sisters all ended up in, at least what they were studying was either psychology or sociology or political science. So
Yeah.
there
So there is
wasn't
kind of
a
this
lot of
like
science in the family.
there was a lot of social science in the family, like The
Yeah.
y'all were, so do you remember conversations that would have, now you look back and think we were kind of having
Yeah.
conversations about social science from the very beginning?
Oh yeah, we were a very politically engaged family. So my dad was a pollster. So Trudeau Senior, not the current prime minister, but the one from the 70s.
Yeah.
He was the pollster for the Liberal Party of Canada.
Your dad was?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We talked about politics a lot.
But it would be like you would talk about politics, but it would also be kind of connected to like the people, kind of like what they're thinking or what their beliefs are.
Yeah.
Not just like pure kind of philosophy, but just
No, not at all. But we
oh,
talked about particular issues that were happening in the country at a time because he was thinking about those political issues and trying to get the pulse of the country to help the prime minister.
so you're doing that in high school. You're thinking about this stuff in high school. Huh.
Yeah, even earlier.
Even earlier. Huh. So
Yeah.
so you're interested in math, you're good at math, you kind of have that, you have this creative side, and you're sort of interested broadly in like the social sciences, for lack of a better word, or however. And
Yeah.
so do you notice now, looking back in high school, that you kind of start to drift sort of towards particular topics that now make sense when you look at your life?
No, not in
Yeah.
high school anyway. So like I started college as a history political science major, and I took economics because I thought it would be good for me. And I took math because I liked math. But otherwise I was history poli-sci.
History, poli sci.
And it was in my first year that I realized I really loved economics.
Really?
So that, the intro to econ course at Queen's University, and that was like, oh, this is how I think. This is exactly, these are the things I find interesting. So I got super excited about that.
What was it?
To the year.
What are they doing in that intro class? Do you remember what it was that kind of captivated you?
It was, thinking about the world. I had no exposure to economics before that. So thinking about, the simple concepts, supply and demand and the idea of equilibrium, how good intentions can go bad. And things like rent control, that made a lot of sense to me once you mapped it out. And then sometimes how good intentions can be great when you try to deal with externalities and pollution. And then just having, that's the micro part. And then for most of undergrad, I was more excited about the macro part, which is these big social problems of recessions and unemployment and inflation. It seemed like there was a toolkit to think about them and try to understand them. And that I found very exciting.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm just now kind of speculating, but do you think like, because you had that interest in math, do you wonder if maybe the graphs captivated you even, Tom, too?
100%. Yes. I found the graphs very intuitive, easy to understand. And frankly, I still do. So lots of economists, when you get to a certain point, still, start to think in algebra. Calculus. I still think in, graphs going one way or another.
It really seems like that, was a real breakthrough when you think about the history of the science, just like these little bitty things where we can put them into pictures, the models into pictures. It seems like it really, really was a powerful thing, because I just have had, I mean, it's not all, a lot of my intellectual experiences haven't always been in graphs, but when they are in a graph, it's really deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So you take that class. Was that just like a standard econ intro class, or was this like famous professor or something like that?
No, it was a standard intro class. I actually wish I think my name, we called him, my professor was a grad student, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know what happened to him. I think his name was Professor Biswell, but I don't even know his first name. And Biswell's common enough that I tried to figure out who he was, and I can't find him. And then in the later years, second, third, and fourth year, I started to have inspiring researchers as professors,
Really?
who be actually in particular into macro and economic history. which isn't
Oh,
really where I landed, but we'll get to there.
yeah. So you're you switch out of history, political science, or do you just kind of end up doing like a big bunch of majors type thing?
No, I switch out of history and political science to econ. I think I ended up with enough history courses that it could have been called a minor,
Yeah.
but I never, formally did that. But I did a couple of history courses in the history department and then lots of economic history.
Yeah. Did you know that you were going to need to continue to take math, or is it just that like math had a lot of consumption value, so you were taking these classes?
Um, after first year, I just took the math that was required for econ.
I see.
So in first year, I didn't even take the econ math. I took the sciences math because I didn't know I was going to be an econ.
Right.
And then after that, I took the math required for econ. But at Queens at that time, it was pretty intense.
This is like the mid 90s.
This was mid 90s.
Okay.
So the math requirements.
Queen as a school had very strong math requirements.
Yeah, for an econ major relative to. So like a lot of my peers in grad school were math econ double majors or something like that, or math minor. I didn't have that, but I had almost enough math. I still needed math camp, and I did some catch, but not as much as someone who was an econ major at a U.S. school.
So it's not like the carrot. So of the carrot and the stick for taking all the math, it was more of like the stick. You had like the requirements.
Yeah.
But then was there a point where you're thinking, I gotta now the vision of my future is becoming a little bit clearer and I need to take more math, or was it not like that?
So I had no idea in undergrad.
Yeah.
So I just did whatever the school said I had to do and chose courses that were interesting and had no thoughts about mapping out that as a future, because I just didn't know. First of all, I didn't really even know what an econ PhD meant.
Right.
And the advice I got was sort of, do what you find interesting. And so that's what I spent time doing. I took some maths. And I liked math and I was good at math, but relative to my peer great math class, I've never been at the top.
On the math.
So, on the math side. So I've liked it. I've seen it as interesting and necessary, but I'm not. People are in econ because they loved math and then wanted to figure out something to do with it.
Right.
That's not so much the angle I've come from. Math for me is very cool.
How would you describe your angle then?
Yeah. I get excited by what's going on out in the world and trying to think through the tools for but it goes back and forth. So sometimes, we've had advances at, more in my research career, we've had advances in tools. And then hey, that's a really interesting tool. We can now, we can now think about how to study this old problem that we might not have been able to before. So there's a little bit of back and forth. But generally it's, the stuff in the world that I find interesting is the starting point. And which almost always, at least since, for the last 20 years, comes from a conversation with a colleague. Hey, that's interesting. We have lunch together and like, oh, wonder what that looks like. And then that spins out into a paper.
Right. So yeah. You're that even kind of makes me think of what you said about you and your dad, him coming to you about y'all's conversations were about what was going on in the world, not some kind of pure theory. It was just more like this is what's happening in the world, and then you would talk from there.
Yeah, we'd talk about the political issues or something. We wouldn't have any. It wouldn't be rooted at all. And is this, which kind of philosophy are you thinking about? That just wasn't. I was a kid too, but that just wasn't the conversation.
That wasn't the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, there's nothing in that college experience that's like, I'm going to be interested in like questions like IO or industrial organization, or there is no internet. There's no internet content. That would have captivated you back then, right? What had there been?
No, there wasn't even really an internet.
Yeah, right.
Graduated in 97. So I guess the hype was starting. But in my last year, I took an economic history course with Marvin McGinnis, who is an economic historian.
Yeah.
And he taught us Joe Mulcair's Lever of Riches as the core textbook,
Uh-huh.
and then a bunch of other economic, history of technology
Right.
ideas. And I loved that course. That was maybe the course that I found most exciting in all of undergrad. Like Marvin, he really inspired me.
Ah.
And, then when I was applying to grad schools and choosing grad schools, I applied to Northwestern, largely because Mulcair was there.
Oh.
And then I got in and selected it for a handful of reasons. But among them that, this person who wrote the book that inspired me so much on the history of technology was there already. And I thought, well, I really love history. Maybe that's a path to be an economic historian.
So you originally were hoping to be an economic historian?
Well, I hadn't quite decided. So economic historian or macro.
Or macro.
I ended up as far as possible for macro, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
But early on, I was kind of doing economic history of the 90s. So
you were in that's what in the 90s you were doing that initially?
Sorry, just to be that wasn't clear. Some of my early papers, my approach to understanding the internet were had a lot in common with the way the economic history of technology folks thought the previous days. So it was, it was not history because it was so recent, but it had a very similar lens.
So you go to Northwestern, it's like econ history, macro, but you're also maybe the technology part is kind of you're kind of interested in it. You noticed that you were thinking, I want to do econ history of technology, kind of. You were already thinking that way.
I was not like, I'd love to say there was some grand plan or anything like. Realistically, I went to Northwestern because it was the best school I got into. Yeah, right. It wasn't any much deeper than that. I had no idea, honestly, what industrial organization was. I hadn't taken any IO. It wasn't much of a focus of what I'd done at Northwestern. My favorite two classes were a macro search class with Shuyang Shi and this economic history of technology class. I arrived at Northwestern, realized, at least at Northwestern, that macro wasn't what I thought it was. And that I really loved micro. And in particular, Mike Winston was, taught us the last sequence of micro, and he was teaching Mascolo, Winston, and Green, and it was pretty cool. Yeah. And then the next year I decided, well, we seem to be really good at IO here. Let's do some IO. Let's do some industrial organization. So it was you get through your first year, and he had taught Winston's teaching your part of your micro sequence. You do well in it. Is that the thing? You actually kind of do well enough in it. But I loved it. You loved it. It was more that I loved it than I did well. I did fine, but it wasn't like I was top of the class. What was Dr. Winston's main specialization? I interviewed Mascolo this week, and I know about general equilibrium from his part, but what was his main area? Or is IO? It was IO. It was IO. Oh, okay. So you're getting IO from the source. Exactly. Oh, yeah. And then the next year I took the IO sequence. I took some history, and then some theory and econometrics because I thought it was good for me. Right. And which was correct. It was good for me. And realized that I found IO fascinating, and so I decided to go into IO. So that happened. So what do you end up doing your dissertation on, and who's your chair? Okay, so my chair is Rob Porter. Yeah. So IO, and my dissertation. I ended up doing my dissertation on search engine competition. Way back when there was actually competition between search engines. So I got data from essentially from a handful of ISPs, from a company that was collecting user level data from ISPs. And I had visited a few thousand people over 3 months. So you got data. Okay. That's so funny that you say this, because this is literally part of the questions I was going to ask you was, how are you getting data
for this research agenda so early in the history, because it's just so hard to, you have to have these access these firms to do this, and you've managed to do it.
So that was so I started working with Rob somewhere toward the end of my second year, maybe early my third year. I got excited about IO generally. Originally, actually, my first two IO papers, the first one was on the beer industry, about the decline of Schlitz beer. And the second one I was leaning to was on advertising in the cigarette industry. And then I had this thing in the back of my head is I don't want to be the beer and cigarettes guy.
Yeah.
And so I decided I didn't want to be the beer and cigarettes guy. I was looking around for an industry. And it was 2000 or 1999, 2000. And there was this, the internet seemed and no. So I figured.
Was this after Microsoft ends up with that antitrust thing where there was the browser? What was that?
It was in the middle
Explorer.
of it.
It was around the same time?
It was, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Competition between browsers. Who's the competition then? It's Explorer.
So
Netscape.
The browsers was Explorer, Netscape. Really, those were the main two back then.
What all was there? Was there something called Opera? Something with an M?
Yeah.
Mozilla?
Mozilla, I think, was later.
That's later? Okay, yeah. I can barely.
I don't.
Ask Jeeves.
So
we'll see if Ask Jeeves is still
out there. So those were search engines, right? So there was the browsers, and actually that's what the case was about, the browsers. My data was about what websites people were visiting. So I was trying to understand your choice of search engine.
Okay, so yeah, describe that data. I don't know what the data is. So this is
so that was interested in the internet. Rob sent me to Shane Greenstein. So Shane at the time was in Kellogg in the strategy department, and Shane was doing the economics of the internet already.
Oh.
He said, I keep getting these inbound requests from companies to see if I'm interested in their data. Here's a whole bunch of them. And he gave me, I guess at that time, one of the lead scholars on it. And so if you were an internet company trying to get a professor to look at your data, you ask Shane.
Oh, okay.
So Shane sent me this list of 10 or so companies, and I found another 20 to 30 that might work. And I just emailed them. Sometimes with this Shane's contact and some without, and say, hey, I'm a graduate student. I'm working with Shane Greenstein. And I'm interested in understanding the economics of the internet.
Yeah.
And one got back to me within 15. None of the others responded at all.
One got back to you within 15 minutes.
Yeah. So I sent an email. The guy came back to me, said, yes, we have data and we want you to help. Okay.
Oh.
So this company in Cary, North Carolina, they were called Phobion, and they collected, they put a, they collected data from ISPs. So they made partnerships with ISPs to collect data on what users were doing.
Okay.
And so they had data on millions of users for every single website they went to. They had no idea what to do with it. This was during the peak of the dot-com boom, the first few months of the year 2000. And they were looking for people to help them. They raised something like tens of millions in funding. And so I went to Cary, North Carolina for 6 weeks to work in their office and try to leave with the CD-ROM of data. That was my goal.
That was your goal.
That was my goal. And so I was there. I was there for 6 weeks.
What were they getting out of the deal?
They were getting use cases, essentially. So they had data. They didn't know who would use it and for what. They were also getting how they structured. Once I arrived there, I realized they had a couple other economists they were working with. Most notably, Greg Crawford was at Duke at the time. He was an assistant professor, and he was also working with their data. But they're just trying to figure out what their data was for. They had data, they didn't know what it was for. In fact, as a commercial business, they never figured out what it was for, and they went under in the dot-com bust. So all that remains, maybe not quite all that remains of the company, but a good chunk of what remains of that company is my dissertation.
Yeah, that CD-ROM.
A very expensive dissertation.
Right.
Okay.
So what's
so
the unit of observation in this data set?
the unit of observation is a website visit.
Website
So-
visit. Oh,
So over the course of 3 months, you might visit something, or this was in dial-up days. So you might have visited something like 1,000 websites. And for each person, I had 1,000 website visits. Those something like 200 to 250 would have been to search engines. Yahoo, Microsoft, Network, Ask Jeeves, Lycos. Google was there, but they weren't very popular.
So back then, were people using multiple browsers per person?
Yeah, they're using multiple search engines. Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Huh.
And
Well, yeah, I keep saying browser.
yeah,
Search engine. They're not the same thing.
they're not the browser is the
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 interface.
software on your computer that allows you to
Yeah.
go different places on the internet that interprets HTML. The search engine is Google, right?
Yeah.
Right now,
I think I used to know all this, and now all of a sudden I just blacked out. Okay, yeah. Okay. So what is your dissertation about?
so the dissertation was about competition between search engines. So in particular, how the core question was there a causal impact of visiting a search engine today on the search engine you visited next time? So do we see state dependence in search engine choice over and above consumer preference, like the underlying consumer preferences? This turns out to have been an old question, or a very focal question at the time in the marketing literature. So a lot of the literature I cited was out of marketing science, journal of marketing research on these models of how people buy in grocery stores. Do they buy, depending on the brand of yogurt you bought last time, do you buy the same brand of yogurt again? And I took those models and applied them to online behavior. And I found, broadly, there was some state dependence, but if you compare the number to what it would have been in like breakfast cereals or something like that, it was what matched. It was lower.
It was lower.
It was lower. There was less state dependence. So, and I started with those kinds of tools. And then as part of the job market tour, someone commented, actually it was Mike Winston in my sort of practice talk. He said, it'd be great. It'd be great if there was a situation where people couldn't visit a website. And so you had a quasi experiment. And that was one of my first exposures to the real idea of thinking about quasi experiments. It was quite late, because I was more doing structural demand estimation as we did it in 2000, 2001. I realized that there was a denial of service attack on Yahoo in the middle of my data set.
Really?
And so Yahoo was shut down for 3 hours. And Yahoo was the number one search engine, number one or two, depending on how you count. And so we now had thousands of people who probably would have wanted to go to Yahoo and didn't, and went somewhere else. And then I could observe if having gone to place one meant that you ended up sticking at that place, or if you just went back to your favorite search engine. So that was my first paper with a quasi experiment, and actually in many ways more importantly than the dissertation itself, because that wasn't part of my dissertation. That I wrote after graduation. That ended up being a core part of my research identity in the economics of the internet space, which is looking for these quasi experimental events that affected some internet others, and assess how it impacted outcomes.
You started that got in your head, and you were looking for more and more of that.
Exactly.
So was that because you just were kind of fascinated by the quasi experiment, or was it that, or neither, that it really was becoming a very productive way of doing your research?
I think more the latter, in the sense that I was, at least in the economics of innovation community, that was the way the field was going. And so at graduation, I wore these two different hats, which is I landed in a marketing department in Toronto. And so marketing at the time, quantitative marketing, was very structural.
Yeah.
Okay. But the internet work I was doing, and sort of it was part of the economics innovation community that Shane Greenstein was a part of, and some others, and that was increasingly becoming quasi-experimental.
Oh.
So my pre-tenure, my work had these two hats. I had structural marketing work, quasi-experimental economics of innovation, and the internet work.
That's a great
And-
set of skills.
And honestly, the rewards. So the immediate rewards seem to be stronger on the structural side, in that I was in public and they didn't seem to have any interest in quasi experiments.
Yeah.
But the broader awards, like the research community and the people who are willing to talk to me because my research was interesting, when I went to a conference or things like that, it was clear that the quasi-experimental work was what people were excited about.
Wow.
The broader community was excited about.
That's very so how are you doing both? So walk me through some of these early kind of exciting projects that were both managing to get data, because that's actually part of it too. Is, I mean, even today it's hard to get data, and back then I'm just curious, how were you going about finding data and finding quasi experiments in a way that's like pushing your career forward?
So there's the data sets. So that initial dissertation data led to a handful of papers. First paper that really anybody noticed, which is a paper that came out in the Journal of International Economics called, what was it called? Does the Internet Defy the Law of Gravity?
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah.
Trade paper. Yeah. So
it was a trade paper. It was like a
trade
gravity
paper.
model. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in my last term at Northwestern, I started working with Shane Greenstein and a guy named Chris Foreman, who's now at Cornell, on a data set that was a comprehensive data set of 30% of all large US establishments, a survey of their internet use. So it was mostly used for selling hardware and software into companies, but it was at the time an incredibly comprehensive of internet use by businesses as of the year 2000. And Shane, Chris, and I wrote probably close to a dozen papers using that data set. So, so one version of it is, how did you get so many data sets? The honest answer is, I didn't get so many data sets. I got a couple of really, really good ones.
I see.
That proved useful. And
was that luck, or was it something endogenous on your part that kind of made that happen?
It was luck. I heard your interview with Steve Tadelis saying good decisions are a combination. Luck is success is a combination of luck and good decision making. And it was luck that the data sets came my way. Where it was some good decision making is when I got a good data set. My co-authors and I figured out there was a lot in there and not just one paper.
Yeah. It also seems like you had a good crew. It seems like you stuck with Shane. I noticed you write a lot of papers with him early on. It looks like I did see at least some solo stuff, but it looked like you kind of are in a good collaborative group from a very beginning. Is that right?
That absolutely. I realized very early on that I did not like writing papers by myself.
Yeah.
The last research paper that I wrote by myself, I think, was published in 2006. I much prefer working with people. I've worked with Shane and Chris many, many times. I've worked with Jay Agrawal lots, now with Joshua Gans too. And then Catherine Tucker and I started working together a few years later, and Catherine and I are still writing together. And there's a handful of others too. So,
in that early group with Shane and stuff, when you're fresh out of grad school, what's kind of your comparative advantage in that group? I know it differs group to group, but what was it back then? It differs
group to group for sure. But especially early on with Shane and Chris, I was the econometrician.
Oh, so you're the quasi-experimental guy.
I was the quasi-experimental guy.
You're investing in a lot of like instrumental variables, methodologies, and stuff like that. You're staying up to speed on all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a good time to be an applied econometrician and quasi experiments because it was getting easier. The toolkit in the 1990s, in some sense, there were all these different choices. And then Angrist and others came along and said, no, actually, there's best practices. And for a short time, there was consensus on what those best practices were. And so as long as you could understand the reason for the consensus, It was for someone who was not an econometric theorist. Like I wasn't going to be inventing methods.
Yeah.
I was able to figure out what the right things to do were in a particular situation. So with Shane and Chris, that was clearly my.
Can you give me an example? I'm just curious. What's an example of like there was a diversity of opinion and Angus and Edmonds kind of clarify it? Like for you in your like as you bring it to the team, what was it? What would be an example?
If you have some of them are if you have a discrete dependent variable, do you do logit? Do you do probit? Do you do linear probability? Do you figure out something else to do? And Angus and others said, but if you have 1 million observations, which I did, which we did, or hundreds of thousands, the linear probability model is going to do what you need it to do. And that consensus didn't last forever, maybe, but
right.
But at the time, there were some checks that you had to do to make sure that when you predicted out a sample, or the prediction values were between 0 and 1, and a handful of, and if then go, and other ones on how do you deal with standard errors and difference in difference. That's
after the Bertrand Millington paper. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of things just kind of clear up and now you can focus on your strengths as like a quasi. So what are some experimental stuff that you sort of, were able to take advantage of in that early wave of your work?
Yeah. So, Catherine Tucker and I had a series of papers on online advertising. And a couple of them they were all related to restrictions on advertising that occurred in some places and not others. So the first one, we looked at the price of advertising in search engines, and Google in particular. And it turned out some states have these ambulance chaser laws where personal injury lawyers aren't allowed to solicit business directly.
Right.
And other states don't have those laws. And so what we realized is if you look at law-related keywords, there's some that are impacted by the ambulance chaser laws and some that aren't. Like personal injury lawyer is impacted, family lawyer is not. And the states with those rules were a relatively simple diff and diff, not a one, but a simple diff and diff between the personal injury versus family lawyer, states with the rule, states without, gave you an impact of those laws on ad prices.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the first one that Catherine and I worked on together. That started, I don't know, mid-2000s sometime.
Is it a large community of economists that are consuming this research at this time, or are you sort of in a broad interdisciplinary area where you would present that kind of research to marketing or what?
It was not mainstream economics. I'd argue it might not be. No one knew who I was. My audience is whoever would listen to me. So I applied to so many different conferences in different disciplines. I spent a lot of time in information systems conferences. I spent some time at marketing conferences, quantitative marketing conferences, and econ, typically economics of innovation. So IO wasn't interested in this yet, but there was an economics of innovation crowd that was.
Where are they at this time? Who are these people?
So NBER had an innovation group.
Wow.
That is now huge, but back then it was, one day of the Summer Institute.
Right.
A small group. We fit in, almost a classroom size room. And then there was also at NBR for some of the internet work, there was the interest in measurement. So the CRIW folks half of them were working for the government, the BLS or the census, trying to get their head around how do we measure this new technology?
Yeah.
That was that was also a crew that was interested.
Mhm.
And so there was,
It just came naturally to you, though, is what I'm guessing. It came naturally to you to just be like, I'll just go wherever. I'll go talk to whoever, and it just send it out, see where it goes, and you just had a sense of like, this is all on my back to make it work.
Yes. I wouldn't say I had a sense. It's almost more that I was naive
Uh-huh.
and didn't have much of a strategy, except for that I found this stuff interesting.
Right.
And so I just hoped other people did, and I didn't know who might.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied widely. And early on, that strategy was great because most people said no.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this 1 year where I realized I had to be more selective because people started to get interested in, a wide set of people started to get interested in the topic. And I went from, for every 10 conferences or things I applied to, maybe getting into one to getting into
all 10 of them.
All of them. And then,
yeah, right.
And I had to figure out what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So you're at Toronto. Your whole career's been at Toronto.
My whole career. I've had sabbaticals at Columbia and BU and Stanford, but the career's been in Toronto.
And it's always been in the marketing department?
Yeah.
You're not joint in the econ department or something like that?
I have a cross appointment to econ, so I can supervise PhD students.
I see.
But
are you the only economist in the marketing department?
No, our department's pretty filled with economists.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So
is that normal? Is that a marketing phenomenon?
That yes. So I heard about marketing. Like JP Dubé was a couple years ahead of me. He at Northwestern, also Rob Porter student, ended up in marketing at Chicago. And that was the first time I even heard about quantitative marketing or marketing as an academic career. Even though I grew up in marketing, I knew nothing about it, right?
Yeah.
There was a trickle of economists into marketing before him, but starting with him, that was the year 2000. There was a wave of economists hired into marketing departments on the quant side. And
is that coming from this like discrete choice modeling demand and that kind of stuff? So it's coming from that.
Yeah. Or it was at the time for sure.
And that's what you could do. You came out of Northwestern with like, that's in my toolkit. And I was going to do that anyway. And so has marketing as a field been like kind of intrigued by this quasi experimental causal inference? Have you watched that at all?
Yes, there's been a huge, early on when I started, the journals and the marketing folks had no interest, and all of my quasi experimental stuff ended up. And somewhere around 2010, things changed. And there was a interest and an acceptance of quasi experimental work.
Wow. What's your big theory about what's going on? What's the sociology of all that?
Maybe there was enough
people that retired.
But so some version of it is the economists trained in economics who went into marketing.
Yeah.
They were trained after something like 1998. They understood the value of quasi experiments.
Got it. Okay. So the I was looking at your you have two books and I have both of them, but they're supposed to be upstairs and I only found one upstairs, but I was looking at prediction machines. Is that the first one or is that the second one?
That one.
That's the what?
That's the first one.
That's the first one. How'd that book come about? That's with Agarwal and Josh Gans. So what's the origin of that book?
So, okay, so we're gonna go back a long ways. So Ajay and I were co-authors. We wrote a paper published in 2008. Actually, it was the paper that got both of us tenure. And
y'all were colleagues both in the marketing department?
He's in strategy.
Oh, he's in strategy. Oh, so Toronto must just have this kind of big, elaborate business school.
Yeah, and there's the economists. We all sort of talk to each other.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
And Ajay started this program for science-based startups called the Creative Destruction Lab.
Yeah.
And in cohort lab back in 2012, there was this company out of our comp sci department, out of Hinton's lab, doing artificial intelligence. It was run by a PhD student out of his lab.
Really?
And that was our first exposure to the idea of commercial potential for AI.
When is this? This is 08?
2012.
2012. There's a computer
Yeah.
science student
Yeah.
in the computer science department, or he's in
Yeah.
he's
No,
in
comp sci
he's in,
department.
he's in comp sci. Go ahead.
And he's starting a company to use artificial intelligence for discovering new drugs. So essentially AI to predict which molecules bind with which proteins. But back then that, in 2012, that was totally new. The idea of artificial intelligence for any commercial application.
What would that have been if you didn't call it artificial intelligence? Would you have just said
machine learning?
It was machine learning. Okay.
Yeah, it was computational stats.
Got it.
The innovation out of our comp sci department was the core one was deep learning nets.
And neural nets. Deep learning and neural nets comes out of this guy's lab?
Yeah.
This guy, what's this person's name?
Jeff Hinton.
Huh. Is he still there?
Yeah, he's still there. But the people he worked with, Jan LeCun and others are no longer there. And look, any innovation obviously happens with multiple people, but he's thought of as the founder of deep learning and neural nets. Okay. And so
you guys you were like hanging out with him too?
Not at all.
Oh,
we just this one company coming out of 25 in our cohort.
Got it.
But it was a really interesting company. Then the next year, we had a couple more. And in the 2015, we had so many applications to our lab that were doing AI that we doubled the size of the lab and had 25 AI-based. Okay.
Creative Destruction Lab 2014 all of a sudden sees a surge in demand to come there to be in the lab. Surge of what? Students, PhD students?
So people with AI companies.
People with AI companies coming out of the Creative Destruction Lab.
So they were AI companies coming out of either our comp sci department in Toronto or to some extent a nearby university called Waterloo. But they were, our program was for science-based startups. And suddenly we had many AI-based, science-based startups applying to be in the lab. And we decided to have a whole stream dedicated to AI.
Oh.
And then Ajay and I went on sabbatical. We went to Stanford. Together.
Because this is a partnership that is turning out to be really valuable for both of you.
Yes.
Y'all are both good friends and get along real well.
We're good friends, and our kids are friends, and our wives are friends, and over the years we've become family friends. Okay.
Oh, that's a dream. It's
been fantastic. And then we went to Stanford, and intrigued by this idea of AI, and like let's try to. We focused on the internet. Let's start writing about artificial intelligence. What we saw in the lab, we seem to have this front row seat before anybody else saw it. Let's think about what the consequences are. And we struggled to identify a research question or a framing. And then I went for a walk with Tim Bresnahan, who's a professor at Stanford in the econ department. And Tim was my advisor's advisor, or Tim was Shane's advisor. So he's sort of like, he felt some connection to me anyway. And he reminded me of some of his early work on computing. And said, well, it feels like computers do all sorts of things, but actually they just do arithmetic. And they make arithmetic cheap enough that we find new applications for arithmetic because demand curves slope downward.
Yeah.
And after that talk, Ajay and I went for a run. We started chatting about it. And we realized, well, maybe we can frame this current excitement about artificial intelligence technology. So based on some work by Sendhil Mullainathan and Jan Spice and others, like this, think about prediction policy problems and understanding that this is not causal inference. Sorry, Scott, but it was prediction technology.
Yeah, right.
Is a really useful way to think about machine learning. And so we got all excited and we're like, well, it hasn't diffused yet. So there's nothing empirical here. Let's go talk to Joshua. He's a theorist.
Okay, what year are we right now?
2017? Fall 2015.
2015. Got it. Okay, keep going.
So let's go talk to Joshua. He's a theorist, and he can tell us what the research paper is. Well, if we understand AI is a drop in the cost of prediction.
Is this the first time Josh is kind of stepping his foot into the Creative Destruction Lab?
So Joshua has been part of the Creative Destruction Lab from the beginning, but he's been part, the focus on let's do some research on AI. I think Joshua and Ajay had some conversations independently.
This is the first one, though.
But this is the first one where we're like, okay, we have an idea. We need somebody who understands theory, and we're going to try to unpack it. And then Joshua goes to us, so you want to write a theory paper that says demand curve slope downward? I'm like, well,
I could do that right now.
he's like, I don't think anyone's going to paper that's downward. Like, fair. So we wrote it as a blog post.
Oh,
And so we wrote it up as a blog post for HBR, saying we should think about AI as prediction, and the thing that gets more valuable is a complement to prediction, which we called human judgment. Okay. That blog post.
That's the skill. That's the skill bias technological kind of skill bias technology is judgment.
Is judgment.
What's judgment?
Judgment is, so formally, judgment are the payoffs at the end of the decision tree. Informally,
is the payoffs.
Yeah.
Not the skill.
Not the skill. So, but judgment is your ability to know what the payoffs are. Right? So it's a decision. It's decision theoretic. So we took sort of a decision theoretic framing and said, well, there's uncertainty. A prediction machine helps you resolve the uncertainty, but you actually still don't know what the payoffs are.
Yeah.
And so
that's interesting. Is that original with you? Thinking of it that way? Thinking of judgment as being able to apprehend the end of the tree?
Yes.
And to maybe even see over counterfactuals, like off equilibrium stuff? Is it the same as just like being able to calculate the solution to the game? It's not the same thing.
No, it's not necessarily about calculating the solution so much as identifying the payoffs.
You just even know in the
think about it. Right now, we're in a single agent model, not in a game. You can think about it in games, but games gets harder.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Now your prediction tools won't work as well. Right. And so.
Okay, I'm following. So the value of AI is, how did you now going back to how you framed it? The value of AI is the bundling of the technology with judgment. That's not exactly right. How did you say it?
No. So AI is prediction technology.
Yeah.
So it makes it easier to know the state of the world or to get an estimate of the state of the world. Judgment is given the state of the world and your decision, what are the payoffs?
Okay.
So judgment is knowing the reward to an action in a particular environment.
Okay.
Right. And
can you give me an example? Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. So you might have a rain weather forecast that says 40% chance of rain.
Right.
Okay. With a 40% chance of rain, some people will carry an umbrella and some people won't.
Yep.
Okay. The prediction's the same.
Yes.
The judgment is how much do you hate carrying an umbrella and how much you hate getting wet.
Okay.
And so the insight for sort of the practical use of predictive AI is, in order to understand what decision to make, the machine can tell you the state of the world, but it can't tell you what to do.
Got it.
That requires a human either in the loop after the prediction comes out, or to pre-specify what to do in a given situation.
Oh yeah, right. So the AI is the AI is basically a more accurate description of the state of the world.
Yeah,
but it is not the judgment part. But when it's when it binds with, but it complements judgment.
Yes, exactly. Judgment becomes more valuable.
Got it.
Because
it raises the marginal product of judgment.
Exactly.
Oh. So like, now give me like a real world example of like a business.
Okay. So you might human HR managers deciding who to hire and who to fire. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, I want to use AI for this. Okay. Well, what does that mean? You're going to have some prediction about what a good employee is. Okay. So that definition of a good employee and the benefit of hiring somebody good versus not hiring somebody who's mediocre.
Yeah.
The benefit of hiring versus not hiring somebody who could be good, and not hiring somebody good versus not hiring somebody who's not good. You think about the payoffs in that tree. That's judgment. You have to, if you're going to have a machine automatically sort resumes or even hire, you're going to need to pre-specify that judgment.
Mm.
The machine can't do that for you. All the machine can do is tell you the likelihood that somebody hits a score that you did. And so what you value is judgment.
Yeah. Does that have implications then for the labor markets, for the labor market for judgment? I mean, because you could imagine, you keep sort of kind of, I hear you saying two things. One is you could put a human in the loop, or you somehow pre-specify the AI. Yeah. So it sounds like it could be complementary, in which case it augments a person with judgment already, or it could be substitutable. Is that right? Am I reading it right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of ambiguous what the impacts are on that particular labor market for judgment.
Yes, the impact of prediction. So we have a Journal of Economic Perspectives paper where we were asked to talk about our framing on the impact of prediction machines on the labor market. And it was a paper because our conclusion was we just have no idea.
Yeah.
To the point where we titled the paper "The Ambiguous Impact of Artificial Intelligence on Labor Markets."
Okay, good.
Because we were hoping for something well structured and saying, oh, it's going to work this way or that way. And then once we looked at the examples and thought through the models, we ended up in a place where we said, well, it depends. In almost every case, there are forces going both directions. So,
well, so this, man, we haven't even gotten to talk about ChatGPT. So, I want to keep talking about this, but that's fascinating. So that's where the book comes out. That's where prediction machines comes out. It's a lot about those ideas.
Right. So prediction machines we wrote this blog post. Blog post had an impact. Like people read it and shared it, liked it. And we decided to think about how do we communicate this idea more broadly? Up until that point, we'd all been research paper focused. Joshua had written a couple of books, but it was more research paper focused. And we realized this was an idea not only for professional economists, but for a general audience. And so we found a publisher and we drafted out this book with that thesis that AI is prediction. And that, so that book is basically day one of Econ 101.
It is. This prediction machines is Econ 101. Yeah.
It's Econ 101, but not even Econ 101. It's the first day, which is that first day of Econ 101 is when coffee gets cheap, you buy more coffee. When coffee gets cheap, you don't want to be in the tea business because tea and coffee are substitutes.
Right.
And when coffee gets cheap, you want to be in the cream and sugar business.
Yeah.
You want to
thinking about substitutes and complements.
Yeah.
Downward sloping demand curves.
And then that book is when prediction gets cheap, we're going to do more prediction. When prediction gets cheap, machine prediction gets cheap, the parts of your human work that are prediction are going to go away. And when you elements, which are, we focus on data and judgment. And then there's some other pieces to that are important, like some caution on these are prediction machines. They don't do causal inference well. And some discussion about what it means for company strategy.
So who read the book? It did well, I'm assuming, because there's the sequel that came out. But who did you notice was the primary audience? It seems like it must have had it had a lot of general impact, right?
So it had a general audience. Like it was people interested in the technology industry trying to get their heads around what this meant. So a lot of them were senior business people who would then give it to their team to say, oh, we're doing investment in AI here. They buy their books for their 10 direct reports and say, okay, you need to understand this before we move forward.
Yeah.
There was, some on the deeper tech side, so venture capital, and the tech companies, there it was to help them communicate with their customers about what they were trying to do. So there was the one side, which is the customers, there was the other side, which is people trying to communicate with their customers. And then there was a third audience that's my favorite, in terms of how it's impacted me, which is a bunch of scholars, like academics outside of economics, trying to understand an economics lens on AI, either what they were doing or what was going on in the comp sci department. And so what I found so fun about writing a book like this is that people in the computer science department now know my perspective. And people in the school have now invited me and, I've collaborated with them on work on the economics, on AI and medicine, because they've read the book, they understand the perspective, and they want to think about how it applies to their discipline.
So you think the core idea that they're like, when it's outside of econ, but it's like in another scholarly field, is it this idea of the downward sloping demand curve and complementarities with judgment?
Yes.
That's the thing they can like wrap their head around. Yeah.
It's like, decision theory has, Simon and others is, influential in all sorts of other disciplines.
Yeah.
Think about it a little bit differently than we do, but the roots of that sort of 1960s and 70s decision theory is there. And so when they read prediction machines, it was a different language for something that was familiar to them.
Yeah. Right.
And that's been really fun.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Well, so I was looking through it, and maybe now I get it though. But like I was looking through the index, and I was thinking, there's no mention of generative AI, and there's no mention of large language models. And I know that there's got to be you already have like a contract for a third book that's like and I bet your mom, I just want to throw out there, I bet your mom really likes this cover. It's so aesthetic. It's so soft. And the way they both go together, I mean, it's beautiful. Do you like it?
They did a great job. They really did
a great job. There's nothing better than just like a great cover. So were you sort of like surprised? Let me ask you this. Let me pull it back. When did this large language model, generative AI, as a customer product first kind of like get on your radar?
Okay, so we had Jack Clark when he was at OpenAI, give a keynote at an NBR conference, the Economics of AI conference, probably 2019 or something. So I saw an early version of what it could do, and it seemed pretty impressive.
That was when? When would that have been?
Probably 2019.
He's from OpenAI?
He's from OpenAI.
He comes to the NBR group?
He was a keynote.
He's a keynote, and he shows you what, like GPT-2 or something?
Yeah, something like that. And it was pretty neat. Nir was working with it, and it seemed neat, but not.
What did it look like? It looked like just some kind of. What would it do that was you remember?
So it would do. So here's the thing. They didn't do a live demo because it wasn't reliable enough.
Yeah.
So they'd show us the output, and the output looked like pretty impressive prose. He remind us of things spit out that weren't so impressive. And the user interface at the time was you needed to know how to code to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it didn't. So it seemed exciting, but it didn't really work. As a consumer product, in a sense that language. Yeah, the idea that language is prediction. In some sense, we'd seen that 5 years ago or so.
Yeah, with this whole history of natural language processing. Yeah. Even as an economist, I guess you're kind of like, I know how to do regular expressions in Stata, or so. It's like you sort of, or some of this stuff kind of feels like maybe a little further beyond your skill. Okay, so then what happens?
So then, so prediction machines came out. And we didn't really talk about language processing, a little about translation, but not really natural language processing. And actually, then we wrote our second book, mostly because evolution was going to happen with machines, and it didn't happen. Okay,
Wow.
so the theme of the second book, also from a conversation with Tim Bresnahan, was, well, how come it, what's taking so long, and what are the barriers to making this make a difference? That book came out November 15th, 2022.
Mm.
No mention of generative AI language models, admittedly.
2022, November.
November 15th, and then November.
When did you
30th,
get the book to the publisher, though? A year before?
Yeah, June 2022.
June 2022, you turn in the manuscript and then it comes out that November?
Everything were done June 2022. I think the manuscript was probably January or something like that.
Okay. So there's no mention of large language models at all?
No mention of large language models, no mention of generative AI, except for like, the tweak here or there.
Right.
But that book was about transformative change and the barriers to transformative change.
Uh-huh.
So it fit with what happened. So then, 2 weeks after our book comes out, ChatGPT comes out.
ChatGPT 3.5.
3.5, and the user interface. Really importantly, the user interface, so that anybody can.
It's the browser. That's
browser.
That's what comes. Oh,
Yeah.
That's what comes out. Yeah, right. Because they'd had that laying around, but it's that it's so funny how, not to get on it, but it's so funny how in a way ChatGPT is so like old school. It's like log into a website.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like log into a website and just type. And that's the product. And it's so mind blowing. All right, keep going. So that comes out 4 weeks later after the second book.
Yeah. And then it seemed like the thing we've been waiting for was happening. What I mean by that is we wrote prediction machines thinking that everybody should be excited about this technology. It's so amazing.
Yep.
Then we waited 4 years and nothing happened.
Right.
It's trickling, and it was happening very slowly. And that was the motivation for our second book about why is it taking so long.
Oh.
And then over the last year, things seem to be different now.
Okay. So then, having written those 2 books, why was it taking so long? And why does if this is true, why would ChatGPT be? So was your second book correct?
So yes. Yeah, I think the second book was correct. So the second book said it's taking so long. The old Paul David and Warren Devine Jr. research on electrification, and how even though if you Edison's patent for the electric light bulb was 1880. So even back in the 1880s, it was clear that electricity was going to be a big deal.
Oh.
But it took 4 in most factories. And Warren Devine Jr. has this economic history paper about why. And Paul David pointed out that the computer looks a lot like that history of electricity in a 1990 paper. And so that actually, after, as I said, a conversation with Tim Bresnahan, well, maybe we've got to reinvent the organization to figure out how to use prediction technology well, because it changes who makes decisions, which means a change in power, and changing power structures is hard. So that, I think, is still true. What's changed since ChatGPT is many people can now imagine how powerful this technology. And so I think back in, before ChatGPT, AI seemed very abstract.
Yeah.
We saw it in science fiction. Yeah, people were saying they're using AI for scientific discovery and AlphaFold and things like that. But for most people on a day-to-day basis, they couldn't really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And that user interface meant that we could really interact with an AI in a way that seemed kind of magical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what's happened over the past, year or so is it's gone from interest in venture capitalists or people who love technology to many, many, people and organizations around the world saying, oh, we need to understand this. And so like my career has moved from, speaking to tech audiences and academic audiences to a much larger number of folks who just want to get their heads around what this technology is all about.
What do you mean? You were talking to, like, who are you talking to that's different? You don't have to tell me names, but what kind of people?
Lots of healthcare people, out of universities, businesses who I wouldn't have thought of as being excited about this, like the construction business, the some advertising or marketing businesses. Maybe that makes sense because I'm a marketing professor, but they weren't so interested 5 years ago.
Right.
The some of the traditional software companies. Where else have I? And then lots of like, finance.
So it's like that AI was always sitting there on the shelf like a light bulb, but not really being used yet. And ChatGPT has basically created gigantic demand, not just for generative AI, but like the whole AI period.
I just realized I'm running a few minutes late for a meeting.
Yes.
So
yes. We can wrap this up.
Yeah. I'll take 5 more minutes. I'm just gonna ask him to wait. It's a colleague in an office down the hall. 5 minutes doesn't matter. Okay. But okay. Sorry.
So has it been, do you think that that's true? Like that OpenAI might be creating demand, not just for generative AI, but like all AI?
Yes.
Not just, is that right? Okay.
I think that's right. At this point, I don't know. So we're still the core challenge as someone who most of my career has been about empirics, and understanding sort of how did the internet diffuse and what was its impact in the 90s and early 2000s with studying AI is it hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard to think about anything beyond hypothesis.
Yeah. Right.
So the thing that I find hard to discipline myself about, and I also think a lot of the economists studying this find hard to think about them, to discipline themselves, is what's hypothesis and what's actually in data.
Yeah.
Almost everything we have when we talk about AI is hypothesis.
Right.
Jobs, generative, non-generative. We have models of how we think the world works, and we're extrapolating a lot from those models. And just recognizing that uncertainty is key.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's part of the strength, though, of economics in general is that, I mean, when you even think about the early classical economists, they don't have a lot of data. Right. Or they have, I mean, clearly they have data, but it's not, they have a lot of models, and so it may, I wonder, I mean, do you feel like right now that we can kind of close on this, but do you think that one of the things I've kind of been noticing a little bit with AI when I think about ChatGPT is the theories that I keep going back to with generative AI, they're really old school. They almost kind of go back to you saying you were interested in economic history and macro. In a way, it's kind of like it's theories of production. It's production functions. It's capital and labor inputs. It's distribution and prosperity, structure of wages. And so you're kind of like getting back to just like Econ 101 when you're doing AI, because it's like, what's the production function and what is the complementarities with what this thing is that we barely can understand.
The economics for maybe the economics will get more complicated as we learn more and get more data. But for now, I agree with you. The core models that we need to understand what's going on are old models.
Yeah.
Are the tools that we built as a community for the last couple hundred years have been are valuable.
They're pretty valuable. I mean, so even things like I teach this class right now for non-majors, and it's the Industrial Revolution, and then it's Golden and Katz's book, and then it's AI. And so, even things just like Golden Katz's race between technology and education seems really valuable because it's just about thinking about, it puts you in the frame of mind for thinking about inequality in wages and how this could be impacting it, returns to skill, because you start thinking it's not really clear with generative AI and AI in general, what exactly is the skill that it's selecting on? It's not obvious at all what it is.
I talk about Golden Cats almost every day.
Yeah.
So almost every talk I give about AI, We think about skill bias, structural change, the race between education and technology, and whether AI is like computing in the internet, in which case labor market inequality will grow, or whether it's not.
Right.
And Joshua and I, we've written a couple pieces suggesting we think it's not. But reasonable people can disagree on that. There's
because it selects on so much creativity. Yeah. It's like you're starting to go, I wonder if it's going to raise the marginal product of these historians, people that work with text. You know, I mean, I know we're sitting over here with GitHub Copilot and we're becoming a lot faster, but you know, there's a group of people that their whole forever have been just working with words. Yeah. And you know, like it's entirely, and that doesn't even necessarily, or just individuals that, well, even with things, I the only frameworks I think about constantly are production functions and golden and cats. That's the things I just constantly am thinking about. Well, Avi, it's been so nice to talk, and I appreciate you giving me a little bit. We went over, and I really appreciate you giving me so much of your time and talking to me. This was wonderful.
Thanks so much. Great talking to you.
Gonna see us through. Honey,